Welcome to the Critical Few Actions to Improve Your Business podcast. I'm John Downs and I'm here to help you cut through the overwhelm and prioritise what matters most to improve your business. Let's get started and discover the critical few actions that have the biggest impact. Today, I'd like to introduce you to Anabela Correia, who I believe is one of Australia's foremost capital raising health tech leaders. She helps companies raise capital, scale globally, and achieve commercial success through strategic partnerships, medical expertise, and proven execution. I've known Anabela since 2020 when we met in the CEO Masterclass in strategic planning and implementation. And I've watched with admiration as she has helped a number of emerging and successful health tech businesses scale their businesses. Anabela, welcome.
Thanks, John. Thanks so much for the invitation to speak with you today. I've really been looking forward to this. So thanks again, and thanks for having me.
It's a delight. So today we're going to talk about how you help health tech companies raise capital, scale globally, and achieve commercial success. And I feel that these skills and experiences are directly relevant to all medium-sized businesses across all industries if they're on a fast growth trajectory. And I'd like to explore that using health tech as an example industry. So to get us started, Anabela, can you tell us a bit about your journey into the health tech launch and growth field?
Sure. So I was raised in business by two entrepreneurs. So my whole life, I think I learned how to walk and talk on a shop floor. But my passion all through high school was the human body and how we work. So I ended up with 3 medical degrees, and one of them was a PhD in cardiovascular and renal medicine. I realized during my PhD very quickly that I was surrounded by brilliant minds that were often stuck on the funding pathway. And I remember I had this moment in one of my honours, in my honours year, of just realizing that if we wanted to raise capital for a racehorse, it would be a lot easier than the next cancer product. And so I just got thinking, and my mind went on a pathway of, well, people understand racehorses. Most people know what a horse is and understand what a race is. And so that was easy, but not everybody understands how cancer works or how a particular molecule works. So it was really that moment that shifted me towards wanting to have more of an impact in commercialization and actually really genuinely wanting to help clinicians access capital in a more easier way, a more efficient way than they had been approaching it based on what I'd seen to that date.
Yeah, I didn't realise the breadth of your underachievement with all of those degrees. That's amazing. Are you looking to pinpoint the areas that will make the biggest impact on your business? Check out the Organisation Performance and Value Diagnostic. This powerful tool lets you evaluate your business on multiple facets and provides email reminders to keep you on track. Head over to criticalfewactions.com.au and get started now. So let's start off by talking about in those infancy stages, what makes a business or a founder researcher thinking about as a potential health tech investment success?
So we have a few criteria that we follow. I think it's helpful to have some rules and guidelines. Otherwise, like my team and I, we just genuinely love new technologies and wanting to help people. So it can be easy to get carried away with that, but it helps to have some guardrails around our decision-making processes. So we look at, is the founder solving a meaningful problem? And is it backed by data? Like, is this something that the market actually needs or wants? Can they detach from the outcome themselves? Like, I've managed a lot of interesting personalities on the way, and founders can be particularly passionate and have quite a lot of tunnel vision. And so they lose sight of, in our experience anyway, they can lose sight of where the technology is going. So there's always a gasp of where you want to take the technology to the next phase. And they're very nervous about it being tested and used by other people outside of their little niche and comfort zone. So we look to, are they comfortable and able to do that? Or will there be barriers and delays put up? Are they open to commercial guidance? Are they coachable is very important. I think, are we able to develop a mutual respect where we have a particular expertise and the clinician typically has a particular expertise? And commercialization is hard. It's not easy. It's fraught with challenges and delays and all sorts of things that you can't control on the way. So we do look for resilience. And then on the technology side, we look for, ideally, is the founder or the opportunity in the top 10% of the field? Like, is it really what the market needs? Does it have the ability to have real drive and impact? Can the market grow? Like, is there an opportunity for true growth in the market? Is a product actually better than whatever else is available at the time? Are there workarounds? What does the future of that particular technology field look like? If possible, we try and work out, is the technology 10 times better, ideally, because that will just minimize any friction in the market. We look at the cost of customer acquisition, which is, in our experience, one of the reasons why a number of technologies will fail, especially as multinationals move the goalposts for, we can come back to that one, but what we found is multinationals do move the goalposts where they, at earlier stages, were picking up technologies that they could absorb into their portfolio. They now want to see you break the market or develop the market yourself and prove it, which can be a really tricky position to be in. And obviously, is there a big market? We've seen small technologies that have small markets that, will go somewhere but not somewhere. It's a lot easier to work with a multi-billion-dollar market and market opportunity than it is to work with a much smaller one.
Yeah. So a lot of that all correlates to return on investment. It's the market massive. Have we got a world-leading 10-factor technology? The tunnel vision that got the founder and researcher to the point where they actually have something might be the thing that actually stops them actually progressing or being coachable, or they might just put roadblocks in the way. Yeah. So all of those things will help determine whether or not, and of course, if the founder has already broken the market and proven it, then that makes it really investable because it's proven commercially. But of course, that's pretty expensive for a founder invariably. So yeah, so it's all about de-risking in a lot of ways. And so tell me, what does it take to move a business with some of those attributes so that they've now gone through, I guess, a selection criteria? What does it take to move a business or a founder with those attributes to a capital raising process? Can you give us walk me through an example?
Sure. So you need alignment. So the founder needs to want to go to market. That is, in our experience, the biggest hurdle for them is, I'm comfortable, happy using my invention and my friends think it's great. But then it is a quantum shift in thinking to, well, what happens if the world doesn't like it?
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Sorry, what you meant, they're happy with their friends and relatives using it, but they didn't want to take it any further. But now it's more a question of, do they want anybody else to use it?
Yeah. So it's a quantum leap. So what if it's my baby and what if nobody else likes it? And quite often they've invested a lot emotionally, professionally, financially. And so we do work closely with them to help them navigate the market and what to expect, and also managing expectations that it's actually normal to get no's and dislikes and negative feedback. And we work a lot with them on navigating how to adopt that negative feedback and often actually encouraging it, because it helps you improve your product and improves your delivery and the solution that you're delivering to the market. With respect to raising capital, I think it's a life skill that all companies and company managers and owners should familiarize themselves with. It's the language on its own.
Yeah.
There are many different ways, I guess, to approach it. I sort of gave some thought to this when I was reading through our notes earlier around, well, if I was to consider what are the common threads, and then I compared it back to my experience both on the buy side and the sell side. And when I was on the buy side working in venture capital, the first thing I would do is actually test the market. So I would go to the big wide world and find other experts or other lead users in that particular market, and I would get feedback. I would ask them, I'd either meet with them in person if that was possible, or on Zoom more these days, walk them through a demonstration or a video of the technology and how it works, really guide them through its adoption curve, like where and how it would be adopted in clinical practice. Would they use it? How would they use it? Why would they use it? What else is available to them? What workarounds do they have? We gather all of that information because that's actually quite fundamental to a cap raise, we find. And that helps us. So that's the end user. We then also navigate the payer and the payer cycle. So we go and do some work on just because 10 clinicians want a new product doesn't mean anybody still will buy it. It's not often the clinician who will pay for the product and then on-sell it. It's often a hospital or a health network. So we do quite a lot of work with the health networks in understanding what the adoption cycles are, when and how they're likely to adopt that particular technology or solution. And then we understand how the pay cycles work, whether or not it's reimbursed,
Yes, because
how
the
it compares.
insurance have a big impact
Yeah,
on it.
exactly. How it compares to other similar types of products they might already be purchasing. Is it a consumable or a CapEx product? That all then impacts the buy cycle. And you need to be able to answer those questions as fundamental questions, as well as the market size, the market opportunity, all of the key checkpoints that we worked through earlier. And then we do what I think any standard capital raising person or group would do, which is work through the model, the data room, the deck, the story, and then pull together a network of target investors that fit the criteria that you're after. So do they invest in your technology category? Do they invest in your technology market size? Do they understand the space? Do they have the right patience and tolerance for the opportunity? And that we find can shorten the time to raise capital if you go through sort of really make the investment along the way of just making sure that you've got all of the answers. We try and make it as easy as possible for the buyer. Yeah.
Well, they're being offered so many competing investments
Exactly.
every week, but just the scope and the depth of what you just described, that preparation, even to have a meeting, well, that preparation, even to get to a point where you can start putting together a potential list, a hit list, that sounds to me like anywhere from 6 to 24 months.
We like to run fast.
Oh, no, you do.
We do have, because we've been doing this for almost 2 decades, we do have global networks that we can tap into. We still maintain close relationships with a lot of our sales teams around the world. And we find that we can get a lot of this information together and ready and packaged for an investor approach within 3 to 6 months.
Wow.
Yeah.
And that's working at speed because, I mean, just dealing with the health networks, the hospitals, the buyers, the clinicians, that in itself sounds time intensive because it's actually people-to-people communication intensive. Yeah.
A lot
Wow.
of late nights and early mornings.
Yes.
Time zone
Yeah.
navigation.
And this is something that no founder researcher has got the capacity to do by themselves. Well, they could, but maybe that is a 24-month or longer process.
Yeah. And to be honest, I actually find that they're not as impartial. Like there's a way that you ask questions when you're speaking to the market. You can't ask guiding questions. And we see it a lot with clinicians where they almost feed the information, force feed it to the buyer around this is how I use it and this is fantastic. And then they quite often, there's a lot that happens between how a founder uses a technology and the rest of the world will use it. So there's a lot that can be communicated really well and effectively if it's done properly, and a lot that can be lost and result in a completely different user experience. So there's an art or a nuance of just how you actually get that information. And we find that it is better to have somebody who doesn't have that bias of already having used the technology. Like that's an example of where it might actually be better to be naive and
Independent, objective.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, definitely. And I guess for the founder researcher, there's also a lot of assumed knowledge that they actually have got no idea about. They've been buried in this for so many years that what they see as being obvious will be completely abstract for somebody outside.
Yeah, I think they're quite brilliant minds with quite specialist expertise in the same way that an accountant or a train driver has their own expertise. And I always talk about commercialization as a team sport or an orchestra. It's everybody has a different instrument to play and they somehow have to all come together.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And so what do you see as being the crucial things you've got to get right if they're going to be successful in raising capital?
You have to know your market. So you have to know that there's a market need. You have to have spoken with the end users, the companies who are likely to distribute and represent it. So if there's no market, you do not pass go. It sounds pretty obvious, but not everybody, I see that as a missing piece quite a lot.
Meaning that then quite often you'll see a solution to a problem, but the problem's actually just not big enough to make it worthwhile.
Yeah, or just that level of diligence that I spoke about earlier, that really testing the market. The easier you make it for the investor to understand the problem and to actually guide them through how it will be adopted by who and when and why and how much. So the more you can actually connect all of the dots with real data as opposed to assumptions, that puts you in a better space.
Yeah.
Yeah. I didn't quite answer your question, sorry.
No, it certainly answered part one of the question, which were the crucial things. Just drilling down on that, I'm sort of just thinking about, okay, so if we found it's a solution to a problem in Australia, then what we're looking for is large population masses like the US and the UK, simply because of language issues. But we live in the midst of Southeast Asia, which has probably got double to triple the population centres of those combined. Is it mainly an American play, or is it about ease of access to which markets?
My experience is we tend to follow ease of access to markets, which is often led by the regulatory strategy. So
Yeah.
When I first started in commercialisation, the traditional path was to go to Europe first. It was easier back then. And then there were some changes in the regulations recently in Europe. Obviously, Brexit has had an impact, and that can make it, or has made it, difficult to enter Europe and European markets, which then sort of probably for the last 5 to 10 years, the US market has been an easier market to enter. Although now with Trump, that's still open to, we don't know where that's going. Exactly. I think there's a new clause now called the chaos clause, which actually accommodates for that. So it tends to follow regulatory pathways, and then you can follow the numbers, but then also I think you would have heard this said 1,000 times, the US there's nothing united about the United States. Each state has its own differences and challenges. And similarly with Europe and Asia, you're dealing with different countries, different cultures, different languages. It's a lot to navigate. It helps to have key people in those territories that you know that you don't have to start new relationships from scratch, that you can leverage and work with to really interrogate the market.
Yeah, yeah. And so obviously there's market need and fit, scale of market. What are the other crucial things that you've got to get right if you're going to be successful in raising capital?
I think you have to have your numbers right. Too often we see valuations that are a lot higher than we think the market will bear. So we do like to test, if a client comes to us insisting on a particular valuation, like we will suggest that we think it's high. We have our methodology that we work through that, where we find market comparables. We find other opportunities that have raised at similar rounds, and we look for all of that information. And we also test the market. So we'll test a small group of friendly investors that we can get some initial feedback from. But it's really about knowing your numbers, knowing them inside out. With our financial modeling for all of our assumptions, we, as much as possible, validate them. So we've spoken about that, but then also where we can't validate them immediately. So it might be a quote for a clinical trial. Rather than guessing how much the clinical trial costs, we actually go and get 3 quotes that we can present to the investors. So each of the line items are properly justified. And then that helps make sure that you are targeting the company at the right valuation, or a valuation that works for the market. That's important. I do think it's...
I'm just going to dig into valuations for a second, because there's obviously 100 things that we could dig into, but having done valuations in my early career, I understand a little bit about the art and the science. But you're at a stage when you're putting this together for investors to look at, and you may have very little apart from a brilliant, well thought out, tested idea. How do you value based on that and the potential costs of clinical trials alone?
How do we value the company?
How do you value the investment? Yeah.
So we run a full 10, sometimes 20-year discounted cash flow, and we do an NPV from that. Often go out with at least a 30% discount just to accommodate for our assumptions. But also, general feedback from the market over the years has been that often that's a starting point for a discount, but that's something that we've been able to navigate without too much resistance.
Yeah. And the investing community is pretty pretty comfortable with that as the standard, or the gold standard in your case, I would have thought. So can you give me for instance, so I've dreamed up some technology which is 10x more efficient, effective than its current competitor product. It's going to cost me, 10, 15 million to get it to the marketplace through clinical trials, something like that. That'd be about right.
Something like that. Depends.
Yep, give or take. And so how much would I be seeking from investors as a starting point? Because I take it there's a series of rounds that are typically followed. And that's actually something that you're talking about, understanding the terminology and the vernacular of all the new parties who are coming into the orchestra. Tell me a bit about the funding rounds and the sorts of dollars that we're talking about. And will there be anything left for a founder from a dilution perspective after all of that?
So the funding rounds, it depends a lot on the technology and the opportunity. If it's for a larger raise, like in the tens of millions, we would tend to identify what the key milestones are and then raise on a milestone by milestone basis. So you might want to complete phase 1 clinical trials and have enough to start phase 2 and then progress from there. And all the while constantly managing and speaking with the market to ensure market adoption. I think, to me, in our experience, investors want to see, they're not just investing in something, they actually want their money back. And
it's not a grant.
It's not.
And this is a new experience for researcher founders as well.
Exactly. Yeah. And so it's a whole new discussion around, well, we need to have a discussion around dilution. It's a big one. And when and how we're going to return the funds back to investors. And that's where you see too often in presentations these days, well, we'll build the product and somebody will distribute it and then somebody will buy the company. In our experience, you need to be a lot more specific. So we need to demonstrate exactly who will be distributing and selling the product. We've had, in a recent raise, we've actually had the international sales team or the multinational speak to the investors themselves to explain where and how the product fits within their existing portfolio, why it's an advantage to their existing portfolio, and then also what information or what milestones, so that sort of some checks and balances around our forecast milestones and some agreement and guidance around that. Quite often, especially when I was back on the buy side, speaking with the market that way, especially if you're drawing out projections for the next 5 or 10 years, large multinationals in particular can give you really good insights into your clinical trial design, just what populations to include, the direction of, or the intended direction of their portfolios in the future, where and how they expect to be selling, what changes in the market they're expecting, which to me are just really valuable insights into the narrative that you're going to market with. It's, even though it might be the exit event might be 5 or sometimes even 10 years from the time that you're pitching, the more you can tie up the ends and show path to market, even if it doesn't actually eventuate, but the more you can actually show that it's likely to be real, the stronger I think the story will be for investors. Yeah.
Any other gotchas?
I think founders, so founders and founder dilutions, I think VCs handle this a lot better than most, but there are some quite often very clear discussions around, you've had the idea and the invention, and really it takes an entire team, a global team of experts to carry a technology forward. And the idea is really the first part, despite the amount of effort and blood, sweat and tears that might have gone into developing the technology. Number one, there's still a long way to go, but number two, there's a lot more people now and companies and investors to consider on the journey. And in the same way, the founder needs to be recognized, so do all of the others. And so just some discussions, clear discussions around evening out the playing field, again, looking to industry best practice. There's no set rule for how this should be played out, but I think clear, open communication very early on. I think also understanding everybody's role. Quite often we see companies where the founder has come in, to their credit, they've invested in and backed their own technology to a certain point. It might be $1 million over 2 or 3 years, and they automatically assume a seat on the board and a majority ownership. And so that's a difficult position to be in. It's tricky to navigate. It's not an ideal situation, but you really need to have those discussions up front.
Yeah, well, I remember during the CEO masterclass, one of the tools that we used was
Yeah.
the organisation performance and value framework. And in that particular masterclass, we had a number of med techs. And I remember one of the founders coming up to me afterwards, after having gone through this diagnostic tool. And she said, having a look at this tool and actually having to assess how I would navigate having in place all of these things, apart from the one that I've done, which is product development. And I've actually got to think about how to create demand, how to price it, how to actually put in place a sales channel, how to actually make it at a reasonable gross margin, how do we get it funded by insurers and so on. How do I actually retain a profitability about that? How do I deal with all the issues around actually having teams, potentially global teams, and how to manage those? How to deal with my IP, but not just my IP, which is a bit I'm an expert on, but actually all the infrastructure that actually is required to actually bring this thing to market, and the capital processes and the corporate structuring and the taxation structuring, and then actually also run it so that it grows and grows. I've decided that actually I'm completely the wrong person to be the CEO of this business, but gee, I certainly am the right person to be the head of product development and innovation.
Perfect.
So I imagine for many researcher founders, that's probably a fairly easy, once they understand the breadth of what's about to happen with the orchestra, that's probably an easy thing for them to adopt and see how they can fill that particular seat in the orchestra. But for some, that may be quite an emotional challenge or intellectual or even just a professional maturity challenge.
Yes, we see it a lot.
And you can understand, you used the word before, it's a child. They've gone through blood, sweat and tears and lived on subsistence wages, possibly many years, to bring this child into the world. And then to have somebody, in the pre-funding stages tell you that it's a bit ugly and maybe it should behave a bit differently and it might need to wear this sort of clothing to get it into maturity. There are going to be some significant knocks, not necessarily from an ego perspective, possibly, but also from the perspective of, but this is my child, and what gives you the right, let alone the knowledge, to tell me what should be happening.
Yeah. So
That must be confronting for some.
it is. And I've tackled it both from ground level all the way up to NASDAQ board level. And probably the one thing that I've found that works really well is an accountability chart where we, at a high level, work through what are the top 2 or 3 things that each person will deliver each month to the organization. And so that's one of the things that can be missing when founders automatically assume a board seat. They take on a governance role within a company without having the proper training or experience. It would be like you or I picking up a scalpel in a surgery.
Yeah.
And they assume the role. But then once you start to put some accountability measures around it, well, if you're going to hold this governance role, then these are your deliverables, these are your performance criteria, and we're going to treat you the same as everybody else. That's when they start to have the aha moments of, oh, but I don't want to do those things. I don't have the time to do those things. I can make a lot more money in my clinical practice. And that's where all of the things that you went through, which I love that formula that you have, or Gantt, or whatever we call it, the masterclass key points.
The IP framework, yes.
Yeah, that whole framework is just a nice way of demonstrating the orchestra of everything that's required. And then we've spoken just briefly the last time I saw you about just something I'm playing with, which is the founder journey, which I've really just kind of broken it down into 4 archetypes. So we've got, and I have laid it over sort of the company cycle of the innovation, which is the person is where the innovation happens. You've got the idea, it's all very exciting, and you've got grand visions for where the technology is going. That's one particular skill set.
Yeah.
And then you have the validation stage, which if we talk about it as a clock, the 3 to 6 o'clock, that validation stage is almost a different personality where it's where your reg advisors and quality advisors come in and everything is regimented and needs to follow a particular standard. And we've got global standards that we now need to adhere by. We need to test and measure everything. It's almost the opposite of that innovation stage where it's very creative and you're stepping into something that's quite rigid and you're grounding the idea. It's a different skill set. And then we have what is, I think, is my sweet spot between 6 and 9, which is really getting the technology to market. It's like the catalyst where you're having to really light the fire. It's really difficult. It's the main uphill part. Again, that's a different skill set to the innovation and the founder who's had a great idea and able to test it within their own clinical market. And then you've got that scale and exit phase between 9 and 12, which I'd like to see more Australian companies get to. That's where we really need more expertise of people that have gone full circle around and worn all of those hats and measures, and each one of those steps has their own criteria. So if you are sitting on the board, where and when and how do you form the board? When is the right time to have a board? And then what is the role and function of that governance play as the company goes forward?
Yeah, as you described that, I'm thinking about a client I worked with 15 years ago, and in a slightly different industry, which was modular housing. In the modular housing for the mining sector, when there was a mass shortage of housing for a booming mining sector. And the invention was quite brilliant, no question about it. There was nothing like it in the world. And so passionate was the founder about this that we actually could never get him to release it to be actually manufactured, because, there was no manufacturer who was going to be sufficiently safe or protective or precise enough to bring this thing to market. And so it actually died an unfortunate, untidy and unnatural death. But again, that was one of those things that everything looked good on paper. Everything that was being said at the start was fantastic. The market was well proven. Investors were enthusiastic, subject to proof of manufacture. And so unfortunately, the founder journey stumbled, and it was quite sad actually, because I could see that it was quite brilliant. 15 years, it's now commonly in the market, just not with this founder to that design.
That's a common thread.
The same idea, and they're now commercialising it on a global scale.
Yeah, there's a lot of common threads across industries, I've noticed.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's why one of the reasons I was so excited for us to have this conversation, because, in a lot of ways, the medtech, medpharma industry has finessed and fine-tuned this research, innovation, commercialisation process in a highly regulatory environment, in a global environment. And so it is, with the right guidance, a well-trodden path or a well laid out process that many people in other industries still struggle with.
Yeah. Well, like we said, commercialisation is hard.
Yeah.
You're having to herd multiple cats for multiple different reasons.
Yeah.
Somehow make it all work together.
And so many small businesses that fail are really actually commercialisation startups. They've got a better idea, they've got a better way of doing a particular widget, gadget, service, whatever, and they're bootstrapping it themselves. If they had capital, they may well go to market bigger, better, faster, or they just might have been a more expensive flop. But there's also a reason, and it's called the orchestra, as to why so many of them, well over 90% of them, fail in the first 12 months, if not in the first 5 years. So it's interesting. So we've talked a bit about some of the things that can go wrong from a founder's perspective. What can go wrong from a capital raising perspective?
So much. Everything.
Yeah.
I mean, we work on a no surprises policy.
Yeah.
So as much as we prepare on as many different angles as we can, on the technology, on the timing, on the market, on the capital, on all of it, you can still potentially choose the wrong investors. We're in the process of helping a client close a raise at the moment, and it's been interesting because a lot of the investors in this opportunity have been the technology is in a particular market. And so a lot of clinicians in that market have been investing in the opportunity because they know that the market will shift. And so in this round, we've introduced more sophisticated investors outside the scope of a global friends and family and peers network. And it's been interesting and challenging to manage the relationship between, well, here's X $1,000 because I back the founder and I know the market, versus, well, here are the proper checks and balances for how we form our investment thesis. And so understanding your investors and understanding how to communicate and manage them is something that can go wrong, I think, if you don't have experience raising from different groups. And understanding that different investors will be looking for different, so they have their own thesis and their own expectations of returns, portfolio play, that they're asking questions usually on behalf of more sophisticated investors and managing other people's funds. And so they need to invest against their mandate. And so it's just understanding, just something as simple as understanding that the questions they're asking, they have to ask. They're not asking them to be difficult or to put you on the spot.
Their
So
fiduciary duties in managing that fund.
yeah, exactly. So I think going to the wrong investors or just not understanding the investor base that you're going to, I see overvaluing the company quite a lot all the time, actually. I mean, we have one at the moment. We have a couple of raises that we're supporting. It's an early stage technology. It does have a national contract for sales and distribution throughout a network in Australia. They have had extraordinary sales in their first year, but their valuation is almost 30 times their sales to date. And that's the valuation piece is, I mean, that opens up a discussion around, well, are we valuing today or valuing for the future? And so having a discussion around how to realistically close that gap so that quite often, obviously, if you're going out with a too high valuation, investors will just say, no, thank you. And so you'll delay the raise, you won't raise as much. But that's probably the biggest one that we see.
Overvaluation.
Yeah. We see people trying to do it all on their own. So the best raisers are a team. So where you've got a strong CFO, a strong technical person, a strong commercial person backed by brilliant legal counsel. So it's a team. It presents well. It works well together. And ideally, you have a team lead. So where things can go wrong is not having any clarity over who the lead is. And so for the team. And so just making sure that you've got that coherence and allegiance with the answers that you're giving, that you are presenting as a united front to the investors and you all understand and support each other in the process. And then maybe losing momentum, like sometimes raises just take time. Losing momentum.
They can just wither on the vine.
Yeah. And then I think probably another one that we see a lot is they wait too long before they raise. And so they underestimate, which kind of plays into this, how long it's going to take to run a raise. You can never actually predict it despite how well prepared you are. And so people or companies will sometimes come to us and say, our runway is 2 months or our runway is 3 months. Can you help us raise? And that's a really weak position to be in.
Yeah, it's called desperate.
Yes. So one of the first questions an investor will ask for in a due diligence process is they'll ask to see your financials. And if they see that you have a tight runway, then it's just not a great position to be in. We often avoid, there's a limit to what we can do there.
No. Yeah. And we talked earlier around the issue of dilution and I guess the percentage that an investor is going to want for the investment they're going to put forward is obviously a really essential conversation. You know, in a mythical world, an investor would see the brilliance of the the researcher and hand over $10 or $15 million and be happy to accept sort of 5%. On the other mythical side of it, the investor would say, look, we bring all these things to the table. We're actually going to bring you from greatness with like 95%. How does this continuum get navigated? Because without the funding, the organisation has got no value. With the funding, it has got some great value, but what's fair recompense for the researcher, investor, founder?
So again, I think one of our mantras here is no surprises. So we spend a lot of time on the model, working through the model and then looking at the impact of the investment and the dilution factor. We have templates that we run through outside of the model that demonstrates, well, at this pre-money and this investment, this is your holding, your equity holding. And so there's no surprises from a founder perspective or a company perspective going into a raise. We also very clearly stipulate in the raise documents, in the presentation, what is on offer, what we're raising, what equity percentage it will buy in the company, the type of shares, are they ordinary preference, where they sit in the hierarchy of all the other investors. It's very transparent from the outset, which then just gives you, if there is room for negotiation, a more robust negotiation and discussion. We always try to preempt any questions that will come through based on due diligence on the investors. So a lot of people, I'm still amazed, that don't do due diligence on investors and what their previous investments look like, what they like to deal with, both before, during, and after the raise. So we kind of work through all that so that we've got a fair understanding of the types of questions and pushback on any dilution that might come through. We also try to see dilution not as, it's a trade-off, not a loss. So
Yes.
you're actually gaining something, and in return
Massive. Yeah.
for that to work, you need to give something for it to be a balanced, equitable relationship. And so that's where it, diligence back on the investor. What else are they bringing besides money? Quite often they have experience and networks, and they might have exited a company that's very similar to the one that we're working with, or they bring a certain level of expertise that we don't already have. Maybe something we see more of than, and it can depend on the stage of the raise. Like angels, if you're going sort of at an earlier raise, angels, depending on how sophisticated they are, will have a fair understanding of what percentage they want to hold in that first round. And they're factoring in their future dilution. And so ideally, an angel network might want 20% of the company in the first round because they know they will be diluted. And ultimately, if the company grows, they might end up holding 2%. So there's no point starting at 2 because it will dilute their power throughout. And they see themselves as contributing more. I think VCs see it very similarly. When I was back on the buy side, I was a lot more aggressive and would start with a much higher percentage, sometimes as high or more than 50%, on the basis that we were bringing in significant capital and expertise and networks. So there's a lot of different factors to navigate. So it can be tied to stage of round, the type of investor you're working with, and what they bring.
Yeah. And so, so you talked about angels and venture capitalists. Then just going through the likely series, what then follows that?
In the perfect world, an exit of some description. I haven't navigated an exit yet. I have had a lot of interest though in the private equity space and private equity markets and how they work. So I've been on my own personal learning journey on that front, just doing a lot of reading and listening to podcasts and speaking to people in the market. And what I like most about that particular space is their ability to scale a company to a formula.
Yeah.
And I haven't done it yet. So other than we are starting to apply some of those tools to our clients now, but that there's a formula that they follow, there's a particular expertise that they hire, there's a market knowledge that they have. So it's an exit, usually an acquisition. I don't believe an ASX listing or a listing on any market is an exit. All you do is have a lot more shareholders and accountability. Or it could be a private equity round if you have in the order of 4 or 5 million revenue or more, ideally, depending on who you're working with. And then you can scale that way as well. That would be next.
Yeah. Okay. So we've now worked through a successful capital raising process and we've got funds. What happens then? How do they then bring the product to market?
So I say that's where the real work starts.
Yeah. After all that real work.
After all of that work, the real work actually starts when you've got the capital, because now you have to switch to execution mode, which is something that I see is missing a lot in our market. It's you really have to deliver on what you've promised, and you need to demonstrate that you're delivering. You need to put together, we're quite big on transparency and reporting consistently against milestones. So ideally you've presented to your investors a set of milestones that you'll test and measure. You then break them down to a quarterly delivery schedule and then a monthly check and balance and a weekly cadence. And so we tend to set up, it sounds very methodical, but it actually works. And what I find is you end up building really robust, accountable teams around a system, a cadence, a rhythm that you're working to. Everybody's really clear on what they're contributing to the company and the overarching strategy, and very just regular, clear, open communication. We report back at least monthly to investors, and we recommend that our companies do that. Even if there's nothing to report, just to check in, this is our progress that we're making. We're still recruiting for the clinical trial, whatever that that check-in is, just because you really are building a long-term relationship here. I've heard some investors joke that their investments last longer than some marriages. So
Sadly.
see it that way. Just communicate. You can't over-communicate. And that means too that if you hit a challenge, so it's very rare that a plan gets executed 100% to the plan. If you hit a challenge in the market, the drug doesn't work as well as you thought it would, all the clinicians that said they would use it have found something else to use, report that back straight away. Don't hide it. Don't
Surprises.
ignore it. Don't try and navigate around it. Obviously, try and work through some possible solutions, but absolutely communicate it and set a cadence and clear communication, which sounds really simple, but it's like your structure that you had up earlier. It's a lot to navigate. It's a lot to coordinate, and it's a lot to manage moving forward. I think having the right governance team helps a lot as well. So my ideal governance team is a team of people who have been where you want to be in 5 years.
Yes.
Yeah. That is, to me, the perfect board composition of at least 3 to 5 people with relevant expertise in the area that you're in, the market that you're in, who have been where you want to be in the next 5 years. It saves a lot of time. And as far as helping you navigate the market that you're in, the growth that you're managing in the company, and having those sounding boards, it can save a lot of time and a lot of headaches. Yeah.
Oh, look, I think that's absolutely crucial. As one of my partners once said to me, we've seen this movie a number of times. We know how it's going to end.
Yeah, exactly. So they can see the train wreck happening before, hopefully.
And they can see where the curves are and the rails, and they need to actually
Exactly.
how to navigate those issues.
Exactly.
That's absolutely invaluable. So when we then think about that process, so communication's got to be one of the most crucial issues. What else is crucial to being successful in transition into a commercial and production success?
Other than communication, it's ability to execute.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So then it's just, I know I'm oversimplifying it, but it's the only way I can explain it is, and one of my favorite mentors has said to me, if you can't simplify it, you don't know it well enough. So I think, just again, it's the execution. So making sure that everybody's clear about what they're doing, what their roles and responsibilities are. We have really clear sort of each of the roles in the company, what legal is delivering for the month, what regulatory is delivering for the month, what each party is delivering, and then communicating back. So the company gets into a cadence. And then for any special projects, because they all come up, it might be, we think there's going to be a change or a pivot in the market, or we need to prepare for something. We would call that a special project, then that then gets managed separately. So it doesn't take over your day-to-day.
Day-to-day operations, yeah.
Yeah. And I think alignment, like really clear alignment across the team of where the company's going, why it's going in that direction, who's required to do what and when, just so that we encourage, it's an innovative environment, but also everybody's fully aware of what's expected.
Deliver.
Yeah. So we often refer back to a rowboat. So everybody's rowing the boat in the same direction. You're throwing as few crabs as possible, and the cox is steering the boat in the direction it needs to be. And then you've got your board on the side of the bank yelling out directions. And it sounds really simple, but the amount of times that we see just one person, if we can stick with the boat analogy, want to go off into a different tangent, the amount of damage it can take, or time and effort it can take to course correct. Exactly, to get back on course in the direction that the company's going in, so that you are delivering to your milestones, so you do have happy investors. It's not to be underestimated. And so a lot of the cadence that we build into our clients focuses on maintaining that momentum and that flywheel, so that it's easier to build and add things onto the company than it is to go off on completely different tangents, then have to course correct and row back in the direction and get back on course again. So
and coming back to that analogy, I mean, thinking about the cox, who in some ways is the CEO steering the ship, right?
Yeah.
How often would that typically be the founder researcher, or would it be a professional CEO?
It would have to be a professional CEO. It would. I often reflect back on, and I was mortified at the start of my career when I finished my PhD and I went straight into commercialization, and one of my first managers would sit were in the medical faculty at Monash, and we would have these inventors come and disclose their inventions to us in the tech transfer office. And my boss at the time would actually say to a team of inventor founders, there'd be 4 or 5, who wants to be the CEO? And somebody would put their hand up. He said, forget it. It's never going to happen. And he'd walk through each of the roles. And I was mortified at the time, but I actually really understand now why. Unless they've actually gone through the journey that we spoke about earlier and developed all of the skills that you need to navigate each of the different stages and phases of a company and its growth, I would highly recommend an experienced CEO with relevant expertise, ideally in that market. A drug is very different to a device and vice versa. An accounting company is very different to an ice cream company. So ideally, subject matter expertise and networks, it just will run a lot faster.
And I would expect that the investors would have that expectation regardless, almost as a condition of investment.
Yeah, often, in the situations that we're in, it's often the CEO or the CEO-elect that is managing the raise. So they're responsible for coordinating the raise, presenting the raise, and more often than not, investors are backing people. So they want to know who they're investing in. They want to know how well they perform. They want to know how well they answer questions and have thought through the mechanics of the company moving forward. They want to be able to test their relationships, all of those things. More often than not, that would be the structure that we work with and support.
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic. But these are brilliant insights. I can see how this applies across industries, not just to the med tech space. So Anabela, you've been doing this for over 20 years now globally, and this is not something you can make up as you go along or blindly follow a process that you created from GPT. So how do you actually help in this process?
In which process?
The whole med tech idea to commercialisation process.
Well, we bring a lot of expertise.
Do you guide the process? Do you get engaged to run the process? Do you sit on the sidelines and watch the train wrecks and take photos for YouTube? How are you engaged in this process?
It depends a lot on the opportunity and the company. So if it's an early stage technology, an early stage founder, it depends on how well resourced they are. We've actually created a lot of our own products now that are more accessible for people who are in that position, where we'll actually guide and mentor them through the fundamentals of how to run a company, how to raise capital. I've noticed there's a really big difference in the people and the companies that we mentor through that process. Instead of having us do the work for them, they come out. It's just a delight to see their growth. And there's a really big difference. I remember even back in my consulting days at PwC, we would write a business plan for somebody and you know that company's never going to read it themselves. And so how do they run the business when they haven't thought through all of the components that you've contributed into that plan? So for earlier stage technologies and founders who might not be ready to raise capital yet, we have some tools that we can help them with that they can access themselves, that we then guide and mentor them through the process of raising capital or setting up a company or whatever it is that they need help with. Usually they're 3 to 6 month courses, for want of a better word, but it's really, I think, teaching them the fundamental skills that they personally need if they want to carry that company forward, or at least even in the future manage people who will be doing that for them. Then if the company is more evolved, it might be a clinician founder who really just does not have the time, the skills to carry the opportunity forward. We will often step in as fractional CEO or a fractional role in the C-suite. So that's usually so that we can help them secure capital, structure the company, put everything in place so that it is ready for a raise. And then depending on the opportunity, we can either stay on.
Yeah.
I occasionally will do that for clients, and never more than one at a time. And so we'll stay on as the CEO. It might be to get the company to a certain position so that it can actually raise that extra level of income. So it might be we get it to first revenue and then we can do a bigger raise and then bring in the global, more experienced team. And then also we do a lot of advisory work. So I do sit on boards, I do advise boards, both local and overseas. And I actually quite enjoy that. It's where I just see the biggest opportunity for impact and change and influence. And you really get to see what's behind the curtain. I quite like I really like the level of honesty and transparency that you have at that level. So they're the ways that we help.
Fantastic. If you really want to kick off your strategic planning and work in a supportive environment with other CEOs and leaders, the CEO Masterclass in Strategic Planning and Implementation is for you. This 10-month small group course helps you craft your strategic plan, present it to a group of peer investors, and develop a habit of monthly implementation. Our waitlist is open now at CriticalFewActions.com.au. Now, thinking back to when we first met, how did you find the CEO Masterclass in strategic planning?
I totally loved it. Like, I still use it. I can't rave about it enough. I still have your structure up on my wall. I still refer to it on a regular basis. Sometimes I look at it from my own company perspective of, well, what should I be doing next? And it just really helps move the company forward. So I know that if you want to move a company forward, it's not 1,000 things at once. It's one thing really well, do it really well, set it up, and then move on to the next thing. So I can't speak more highly of it. Like, it's just been a game changer for us. And we implement a lot of that in with our clients. And we just help them understand like what is involved in running a company. It's almost a curse and a compliment at the same time, where people think that what we do is really easy, and then they get a good sense of all of the different things that you have to coordinate when you're running a company. And that is just a really good tool to help them navigate everything that's required and all of the layers that sit behind each of the boxes that you've got there. So everyone should do it.
Yeah, I should bet you to do an advertisement for me. But certainly, those understanding what are those 75 factors that we're all experts on, and if not, we need someone to actually be doing for us, is often for founders and for CEOs quite overwhelming, particularly as they're trying to figure out how to deal with the urgent, the important, the thing that's a crisis at the moment, and how to prioritize those critical few actions that, if they did nothing else, would have the biggest impact. And for many of those founders, they think that changes almost every day, as opposed to there being a 1, 2, 3 month focus on those things. So Anabela, we've covered a lot of ground today. It's been fascinating, as our conversations always are. Are there any resources, books, videos that you might feel are going to be helpful for fast-growing founders and researchers that they should start to take a look at if they're preparing themselves for liftoff?
So I read all the time. So there's a few that I go back to that I've actually read more than once now. So one of them is Lost at CEO. So that was written by a private equity manager for private equity companies. And it simplifies the 75 points on your framework into how to implement that on a day-to-day basis in a business. The EOS system, which also by the same author, a book called Traction, which both of those books are excellent for startups. It's actually targeted at how to structure your startup. I keep them both on high reference. I forget the name of the book, but it was the author of King Kong, which is a marketing company. Yes. It was one of Australia's fastest growing marketing companies. In particular, his last chapter around how he sells to different types of different market segments and specialists. So they're probably the 2 or 3 that come to mind at this point. I'm sure I'm going to think of another 10 when we stop talking.
I'll tell you what we'll do is we'll pop those into the show notes for this episode so that people can reference them. Any other things that you wanted to suggest as good preparation?
Preparation for raising or starting a company?
For founders and researchers as they sort of get themselves organised.
I think do your research on multiple levels. Don't be afraid to launch outside your comfort zone. I can say I understand how you feel, because I am often quite anxious about posting and talking and doing all of these things myself. So I understand, but you do need to get over that fear and surround yourself with a team of people who have done what you're wanting to do. I think you'll have a lot more fun and get a better result.
Good. Anabela, it's been an absolute delight to talk with you today about this and to give us a fascinating insight to the clients that you support on their path to greatness. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, John. I've had so much fun too. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
My pleasure. Thanks for listening to the Critical Few Actions podcast. Don't forget to subscribe and grab the downloadables from the show notes. And if you found this episode helpful, I'd really appreciate it if you share it with your peers and your team. Stay focused and take action. The Critical Few Actions podcast, including show notes and links, provides general information only and is not individualised business advice, nor can it be relied upon as such. You must take responsibility for your own advice, decisions, and actions.